Got it.
So yeah, that's what I was talking. I think I just wanted to brainstorm future episodes. So I started with extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. That quote right there. There's a couple
Mhm.
different ways you can go with that quote. One is you can talk about extremism, and I'm thinking of an episode like, what is so bad about extremism? Something like that. Because um, Mother Teresa was extreme.
Yeah. Is extremism all bad? Right.
Yeah. Mother Teresa was extreme. Jesus was extreme. I mean, the entire early church was extreme, right? On certain things.
And
And
so were the Pharisees who stoned the early Christians, and so were the Romans who persecuted the church. They were extreme.
sure. Well, and extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. You know who said that was Barry Goldwater. He
Mm.
said it at the Cow Palace in 1964 at the GOP convention in San Francisco, which is just over that bridge right there. And Harry Jaffa was the one that wrote it. So it's I don't know, you say he's quoting, is it a Harry Jaffa quote or is it a Goldwater quote? Well, Jaffa wrote it, Goldwater said it, and it's Aristotelian, obviously. Jaffa did his doctorate on Aristotle.
Yeah.
Um, and so let's get the quote before us. Extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. What's
Yeah.
interesting about the quote is that the Aristotelian mean between extremes for moral virtue is, briefly to illustrate, on one extreme you might have cowardice as a deficiency, and on the other end, you might, as an excess, you might have foolhardiness, and in the middle you have courage. The mean between extremes would be the moral virtue. um so he's saying extremism, which you normally think of as a vice in Aristotelian ethics, in defense of liberty, extremism when you're defending liberty is no vice. And in that moment in 1964, it had people, well, Democrats were frightened about that. the way
Yeah.
the way he was saying it, they were well, put it this way, I'm not sure if they really were frightened, but they said they were frightened.
Right.
I'm not sure. Okay, so that's one topic. Here's another topic.
Well, that's very similar also, just I want to say, to Patrick Henry, right? Patrick Henry made it even more concise. Live free or die. That's that same quote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just gonna go through this list. Okay. Evolution and racism are cozy together. Walls work. Another way to put it is walls protect people and property. Walls protect property and people, however you want to say it. Gun violence saves lives. These would all be titles of our episodes.
Right.
Democrats believe the N-word has magical powers. What I mean by that is that there's very few words that have magical powers.
How about for a title?
But there's something different about the N-word. It can magically transform mentioning it. And I'm not even talking about using it. I'm talking about, so you have to talk about the use mention distinction.
Right.
But merely mentioning it can turn a non-racist into a racist magically.
Right. We should title that N-words and unicorns.
Wow, what do you mean by that? Go.
I don't know. When you said magical, it made me think of rainbows and unicorns,
Okay.
so just inwards and unicorns.
Let me go down the list a little bit more. We can come back to these. Gun violence helps women. I'm not trying to be abrasive. I'm not trying to be like, I'm avoiding the typical things they tell you to do, like put a number in there, 5 ways women, gun violence helps women. I'm not going to put numbers in there. Okay. There's no lists. Okay. You're not children. Democrats have Republican beliefs. I like that one.
I like that one too.
And
Yeah,
you could say the other way around
yeah. I
too.
was just gonna say that could cut both ways.
Sure.
Yeah.
Democrats have Republican beliefs. What I mean by that is Democrats self-censor their Republican beliefs. And the only difference is on campuses, I just say my Republican beliefs and then they self-censor and act like they feel bad about it. So like, for example, they self-censor, they do believe gun violence saves lives, because if there's an active shooter on campus, shooting all of us defenseless people, statutorily defenseless people, because you're a felon if you carry on campus here in California, even if you have a concealed carry permit. So you're statutorily defenseless. So because you're a felon, automatically you're treated as a felon, which is the same way we treat active shooters. They're a felon. So innocence versus guilt is totally ignored in the context of active shooting. Self-defense itself is now a crime. And yet we all know that gun violence saves lives because the person you're going to call to help you has a gun.
That's right.
So everybody knows gun violence saves lives, but you can't say it.
Right.
So anyway, YouTube is a Democrat platform. I think that we need to talk about that at some point. There's a lot actually we could say about that, especially with Joe Rogan.
Oh yeah.
YouTube censors honest disagreement, which is kind of what I mean by it's a Democrat platform. YouTube censors honest disagreement. And you could say Republicans do too sometimes. I think especially on Christian campuses, honest disagreement is censored. You could say YouTube punishes innocent honest disagreement. I want to say innocent because they might think purposeful misinformation is not innocent. I'm not talking about that. Okay, and then here's a little bit of egghead stuff. Political phenomenology. That's what I'm calling it, where you describe. Do you know what I mean by phenomenology?
Of course. Yeah.
Were
I know
you
what you mean by phenomenology. I'm putting those two together.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, I can't remember if you were in the 2002 Biola epistemology 2, epistemology of perception in class. It was in the spring. Gary DeWeese was the professor. We met in the philosophy house.
No,
it was a very small class. I can't remember if you were in it.
No, I wasn't in that one.
I have the I have the, what do you call it? The class roster for 1 year later, 2004. No, it wasn't not in 2002. It was 2003, spring of 2003.
Okay.
I have the class roster for 1 year later, 2004, philosophy of religion, where Swinburne came in from England.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you're in that class.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of classic people from our background in that class. Well, anyway, including two Pepperdine, now they're Pepperdine tenured professors now at Pepperdine. They're both in that class. Huh?
They made it.
They made it. Yeah. Well, I think there's an LA City College professor that was in that class too. Anyway, but okay, going back to the epistemology of perception class I mentioned, we had to read Robert Sokolowski's book, Introduction to Phenomenology.
Okay.
Well, it's just about phenomenology is people say doing phenomenology, they mean describing your experience carefully.
Mhm.
And this helps you understand the world and explain things. And I've thought about American politics like that, where it requires careful description of your experience. So I've thought about a political phenomenology. That's what I mean by just describing, like, all this is like basically phenomenology. Gun violence saves lives. Well, what do you mean by
Right.
that? Censorship, Democrats self-censor. So, okay. Well, I don't know what you think about all that, but we could go back to, is there one that you want to go back to, or two or three?
That was a lot.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. I just wanted to get it all out and just get you hearing what I'm thinking about. And
What was the what were the first ones that you threw out before?
extremism in defense of liberty is no vice. That's what we started with. Actually, we started with a follow-up for Denver Seminary episode that you liked yesterday. The one where he was talking about, I think it's
That,
episode 51 with
that
Mark Young.
reminds me. Yeah,
Yeah.
that reminds me. What you had mentioned, one of the reasons you wanted to start recording just the brainstorming part here
Yeah.
was because some things I replied to a couple things you had said, and some were interesting and some were
Mhm.
surprising. You used the word surprising. So I was curious, what surprised you of what I said?
When I think it was when we were talking about following up from yesterday, the Denver Seminary podcast I mentioned,
Uh-huh.
you mentioned something about going down a rabbit hole, not rabbit hole. You mentioned,
Tide pool, but yeah, rabbit
yes,
hole, tide pool,
that's what you
same thing.
said. You said a tide pool.
Getting sucked down into it.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was an interesting mental image for me.
Oh,
Maybe say more about what you were meant by that.
well, I think that the whole idea of it, I was trying to come up with a mental image of some type of vortex that you're getting sucked into that you can't get out of,
Mm.
and you can't find your way out. In fact, you're not even trying to find your way out. At a certain point, you're in it, and you're just going every.
Yes.
I'm trying to think of it of like even like it's kind of, maybe quicksand is a better mental analogy, because that does capture the struggle, right? The mental ideological struggle that we go through as we're trying to sort through all and sift through all the different pieces. The more we struggle with the pieces and try to nail down conclusions and see where each piece fits, the deeper we get, and we get sucked into, we go deeper and deeper, and then but we still have this sense of uncertainty or doubt, even when it seems like all the pieces are where they belong, so there's still a constant struggle.
Yeah.
Just, I guess the idea that I was trying to get across with the tide pool was the once you get a poor conclusion or a set of conclusions that are poorly done, and you start applying them, well, then those conclusions commit you to other future conclusions. And you, if you have those conclusions as, firm in your noetic structure of beliefs, then you start to go places that you wouldn't have gone if you didn't have those conclusions.
Okay. That's a little abstract for me, but let me
Well, think of
just
mathematics with
apply
Euclid.
that for
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
Well, there was a time when we used to think that
It's a little awkward for me to say that it was it's abstract for me, because I taught philosophy for 15 years. It's a little abstract. That's really abstract,
Well,
man. Okay, sorry.
we all teach different parts though. um,
Well,
uh,
I know
it,
what I was going to ask you is really quick. What part of the Denver Seminary podcast brought that image to your mind? I think it was episode 51 with Mark Young, I believe. It's referenced in the previous.
yeah, he, I remember that it was toward the end. It was
Okay.
probably in the last 10 minutes, probably the last, 10 or 15 minutes of it. It wasn't very long, actually. It was shorter than I thought it would be.
Okay.
But it was the part where he was just recapping what happens when we have, let me see, I'm trying to think. He was recapping and what happens when we take on trying to sift through the ideas that you're trying to sort out conspiracy type stuff, and you
Okay.
don't know where it's going to go. Something gets said that seems to make sense. It fits the data, but
Right. In other words, it's hard to keep track of what's going on because media isn't really there to help us through.
well, that's true. Yeah, that part for sure. Like, we're not getting any help. We're trying to sort through everything, but all these extra sources that are intended to help things make it easier, actually compounding more possibilities
Right.
and making it increasingly difficult. It's kind of like with information. One of the things, and I don't remember which side I don't remember if it was the Denver podcast, because I listened to two of them, or the Crenshaw one. I listened to two of them back to back. But I got another thought about how when we moved over to computers, and starting documenting everything online. I remember when this happened, we would save these PDF files. And then, because I was in the mortgage industry at the time, and we would save these thick old we would have these files, but then we'd get them converted to PDF so that we could store them. We were trying to store everything online.
Yeah.
But then everybody was worried about storage crashing or getting erased or something happening to storage.
Yeah.
So all it did was just created another copy of originals. So we had the originals, and then we had the other one, and then we had this storage. So at the beginning, and for many years, for decades actually, it just all the digital stuff did was just increase the amount of paper that was used, because we had to have backups. And it feels that very similar in this information explosion, this information age. Now you've got information and free speech, and now you don't have academically vetted journals. You don't have publishers who have, at one time, you would think, or at least some, are trying to put out solid, verifiable information. You don't have reporting. You have a lot of opinion. You have a lot of anecdotal. You have people using newspaper opinion pieces for support in academic journals. I mean, it's crazy, right? So you've got all this plethora of compounding information, and it's very hard for the individual to sort through all of that.
Okay, so the issue is lack of trust,
Yeah.
lack of authority, centralized authority, maybe. Plurality, a plethora, not plurality, a plethora of an overwhelming,
Yes.
gushing river, and it's not even a river, it's like a floodplain of disparate
of opinion.
voices.
Yeah.
Yes, like a cacophony.
Chatter.
a
Yeah,
cacophony.
just
And
yeah,
yeah,
white noise.
I think it's overwhelming to the mind, the human mind.
Yes.
We're not
Yeah.
designed to take in all that, and it has emotional effects. It's got spiritual formation effects because
Oh, absolutely.
we're we are now feeling like we're so disoriented that we can't have the peace and calm that we so crave, the serenity that comes
Yeah.
from having somebody tell us what really is true, and we just kind of, oh yeah, that's
Everything's disordered.
we feel like we have to figure it out for ourselves,
Right.
and that's a
Yeah.
lot of work, and
Oh, and you hear that
it's
all the time.
overwhelming. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's overwhelming.
And yeah, everybody's a professor, everybody's a expert, everybody's a scientist, everybody's a doctor.
Okay. Yeah. Well, actually, there's the same number of people that are those things. There's probably more people that are graduating from college because their grade inflated than before.
That's true.
I don't think that's where you were going with that,
No, no, but that's also
but
true.
ironically, people Thomas Sowell has a quote that something like, we've never had so many educated people that we've never had so many people with degrees that aren't educated, or something like
Yes,
that.
yes, yes.
There's a mismatch between the number of degrees and the level of education. The degrees mean little. They mean less and less in terms of actual education.
Right. Yeah, people get degrees to justify saying whatever they want rather than
Well,
actually
and
doing
I can tell
something.
you from the inside, I know I've been in the inside of K through 12, and I've been on the inside of college education, and I can tell you the structural problems that lead to that. The structural problem, and this is a topic itself. I got to write this down. Structural grade inflation. Structural incentives to grade inflation, and what grade inflation does. Grade inflation is death to a civilization. Death.
Yeah, and we've got a whole generation that thinks we got probably more than a generation now of people, young people that think they're just the most intelligent people on the planet, and they don't have any common sense, and they lack a lot. They lack a lot more than they're aware of. Put it that way.
Yeah. I think that's one level of it. What another, a deeper level, maybe, or just another level. I don't know if it's deeper, but another way to describe what you just said is, I'm not sure they really believe that, but they're okay. They act as if they're okay with it.
Hmm.
Uh, what Here's what I mean by that. I think this is an example of Democrats have Republican beliefs. I think Democrats think that grade inflation is bad, but they don't act like it's bad. And the Republican belief here would be grade inflation is bad. The reason I say it's a Republican belief is because I was the only one fighting grade inflation that I could see, and I was the only Republican there. The Democrats were giving into it left and right, or I should say left and left. But if you point out grade inflation to students, they're little Democrats in training. If you point out grade inflation, they will admit and they recognize that it's not good, it's not ideal, but they still want it.
Oh, right.
It's like children, like you were mentioning yesterday.
Hmm.
You remember what you said yesterday, or you said something about you're the worst person in the world when you tell your kids to clean their room or
Oh
something.
yeah.
You're
Yeah.
evil. You
Yeah.
are evil, right?
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. Well, my students come to ask me for extra credit, for example, I just tell them extra credit is grade inflation.
And
Because
now you're so
because
mean.
you don't risk anything by not doing it, and you only gain something, and all you're doing is providing extra work for me, the professor. I don't get paid anymore. So I mean, if it was extra credit, you got something out of it and I got something out of it, that would be, as a part of my paycheck. I'm not talking about bribery. I'm talking about not corruption, but just like if it was just a structure where the more work that you made me do, I got paid more. Well, then I would have a structural incentive to give you grade inflation. But my structural incentive to give you grade inflation is just so that you don't complain about your low grade and cause paperwork for me later. So you actually save me work when you don't complain, and that's why professors give grade the grade inflation.
Well, and you'll also get 5 stars on your internet review of the
Well, that's
professor.
part of the structural incentive.
Right.
Okay, but see, the grade inflation takes all sorts of forms. Uh, Extra credit is one of them. I mean, having extra credit. I usually, or here's another one. Will you drop the lowest score of a quiz? And
Oh,
and
sure.
so, okay, so or the two lowest scores or something. They're used to that because I would give pop quizzes to enforce the reading. And so I said, no, I dropped the highest score.
That's great.
I dropped the two highest scores. And they say, that's not fair. I said, well, why was it fair to drop the lowest score? I said, tell you what, I'll meet you in the middle. I'll negotiate with you. This is the art of the deal, right? I said, I will flip a coin. And if it's heads, I'll drop the highest score. If it's tails, I'll drop the lowest score. Do you want me to drop quizzes? You make the decision. Or here's a novel thought. Here's a thought. Here's just an amazing thought, a mind-blowing thought. How about you just take the quizzes and do the best you can each time, and then that's the grade you earned. I know this is mind-blowing to you, but you could just treat this class almost as if it's real life.
Almost.
Yeah,
Almost.
I mean, you could, instead of it being Disneyland or something, you could just treat it like it's reality, and you're learning, and you could just take your own education seriously. How about that? And you'd get an amazing grade because you worked your ass off and you actually learned the material, because that's how I design it, is if you learn it, it will be amazing for your mind and your soul. That's the way it used to be done. That's the way the Puritans did it.
That's right.
The old Mathers, in New England. Good old Cotton and Increase, poor Samuel and Timothy, and I'm doing a lot of name dropping here. Richard Mather.
Or another way to approach it would be don't go to school at all. This is how the old Olsons did it. He brought up old Mathers, and I'm like, how did our family do it? Well,
I don't know what happened to the
raised,
Mathers since then. Just full
right. But we
founded
raised
Harvard and
cattle,
Yale, and then what happened? I'm wailing.
We raised cattle and worked the land. We used our hands. We had a hard life, right? So, we were out learning all of these life lessons and educational skills through common sense and hard work. That would be another way to approach education, and it can be just as effective, for living life.
That's another topic you just meant. Another topic would be when we talk about ancestors, why do we only go, we don't talk about we do a lot of censoring when we talk about our ancestors.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, you're
Because
right.
I mean, we have so many ancestors, and how far back do you go?
Right.
I was reading this kind of academic book I bought in California. I bought it on the Central Coast. Man, it's freezing up here, by the way. It's just
Oh, sorry.
yeah, this Golden Gate Bridge behind me, it's just freezing.
It's that onshore
It's
flow or
Pacific
yeah.
Ocean behind me. I bought this book in Monterey at my favorite used bookstore in California at the time, which has since closed down because of the pandemic. But just a couple hours south. Uh, it was a book on the California redwoods, I think, or something like that. It was like the flora and fauna of this area. And they were talking about the Indians, but they didn't want to use the word Indian. You could just tell there's something, it's like if you read Indian books about Indians and law, Indian law, which I've done a lot of reading and research on Indian law. Uh, there's a point in time in the scholarship where there's all of a sudden they just stop using the word Indian. They replace it with Native American. And the word native was always used, but it meant like something synonymous with savage or something.
Right.
So okay, so all of a sudden there's this political correctness of using the word that was used for savage, but you just slap American on it. Like instead of
Savage
saying
American.
savage American, you say Native American, right? Like that's so much better than Indian, I guess. I don't know why they say that. The laws all say Indian. The reservations are all called Indian. All the official words are Indian. But anyway,
I
so
just call them Indians.
I say Indian still because that's the classic word, and I'm Native American. I'm not Indian. I'm a native Coloradan. I was born. That means you're born in Colorado. Everybody knows the word native means you're born there. If I say I'm a native of Denver or a native of Colorado, everybody knows that means I was born there. So in other words, I'm talking about my ancestors. I'm talking about my parents, right? That's how far back I went. I went my parents. I'm not going back all the way. And then you get creation evolution. Okay, well, is it Adam and Eve? Or is it you know, some kind of flora and
Fish.
fauna that's not human, or something?
Right.
Well, anyway, this book that I bought in Monterey said the original Native Americans, when they first arrived in America, and I was just like, wait, hold on, they're going across the Bering Strait. They started their journey in Russia,
Yeah,
in
doesn't that
what's now Russia,
exactly.
but they were Native Americans when they were in Russia. See, that's how crazy these people are. Everybody knows the Indians came from Asia. Originally, that people group with those characteristics came over from Asia, and that's why they were called Indians, because they resembled Asians that people were familiar with. Well, anyway, okay, whatever. But it just shows you the length of that people go to avoid that word Indian, and they would say Native American when they weren't even native to America. The people they were talking about, the first Native Americans arrived. Do we do that with any other people group? Like when the so anyway, there's all sorts of little threads we could talk about with when we're
We
talking
do
about
that with
answers.
the Washington Native Americans, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. The
Only
word.
football teams. Those are the only other people groups we do that with.
Yeah. File
Athletic
this
teams.
under I'm going to file this under language is tricky.
Oh, we could do. Ooh,
Language,
that
language games or language is tricky. I
that
don't like
makes me think
language
of
games.
Lewis's. That makes me think of C.S. Lewis's books. He wrote a couple books on words. Really good
Yeah. Yeah.
stuff.
That's right.
Use of language.
I think to effectively discuss American politics, you have to be tuned in to how tricky language is and just be on top of that.
Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that's going on in America is about using words, what words you can use, what words you can't, what words people want to make you use or not
Yeah.
use, the consequences for saying a word or saying two words or whatever. Um, Even the pandemic, right? So, um, there was a podcast coming out of Stanford during, like, I think it was March of 2020. It was I think it was the Pacific Century, I believe. Yeah, I think it was the Pacific Century, which is a podcast with John Yu and Misha Oslin, I
Mm,
think. They're
mhm.
Asian scholars, Pacific Rim scholars. Actually, John Yu's not a he's Asian. That's why he's on the podcast, is
He's an
because he's,
economist, isn't he?
no, he's a professor of law at Berkeley.
Oh, law. That's right.
Yeah. He was in the Bush administration, high up in, well, he was pretty high up in the bureaucracy. And anyway, they called it the Wuhan flu when it first started, because
Yeah.
that's where it was from.
Right.
Just like Spanish flu, right?
Right.
People still say Spanish flu.
I still say Wuhan flu.
I say Wuhan flu too. I believe it came out of a lab there in Wuhan. And I don't know all the story behind that, but I believed it at the very moment I heard about it. But anyway, I don't want to get too into that. Why my background, I have a background that maybe lends some that most people don't have, but in terms of that. But but I don't hear people say Wuhan flu typically. Like, it's considered crude and uncouth, um, especially on campus. Like, you would be censored almost immediately. I'm sure if you said Wuhan flu, but why not say it?
It's better than saying, it's less crass than say kung flu or something like that.
Oh, you mean like kung fu?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. That was one that
well,
went around
to
here
me,
quite a
that's
bit.
not really interesting to say it that way, because the the Wuhan is a specific city, right?
Right.
It's not a race. It's not a martial art.
Right.
The martial arts are, I have great respect for martial arts. And I don't think that has anything to do with getting sick, but a specific facility and a specific city, that's very specific. And just like the Spanish flu, it's actually even more specific than Spanish. Because you imagine if you said Spanish flu and you said it was actually a city in Spain, it was like Barcelona or something, and all you did was say Barcelona flu. You're not, you're not even, um, eh, you're not blaming Spain, right?
Right.
You wouldn't even be blaming Barcelona. You would be just saying this is where it came from.
Right. It's where
But
its
in this
origin.
case, in the case of the Wuhan flu, I do believe that the Chinese Communist Party, which is an alt left wing got socialist government, fascist socialist government. Fascist and socialist go together, just like in the Nazis. They were socialists, so they were fascists. They are responsible for much of the damage.
Yeah.
And the alt left has nuclear weapons, and also, unlike the alt left has nuclear weapons and incredibly powerful cultural and economic weapons at its disposal, including what communists have always weaponized, which is language.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of language. That's why I purposely say Wuhan flu. I could say yeah, anyway, we're getting into that topic. That's really a specific topic, and we can get into that later if you want. But did you have any other? We talked about a lot of stuff here. Geez, structural incentives. Very good brainstorming session, I thought.
Yeah, there's a lot here. Not at the moment. The ones I didn't do an additional brainstorming session after last night, or yesterday.
Yeah.
So the ones that I brought up yesterday, I'm trying to think that, was it, I mean, language, what we just talked about maps onto the use of language, political correctness. That's what we were, that whole idea. So we've just kind of developed that one a little bit more. That's the one I think that is one of the more intriguing ones, the idea of self-censorship. And
Okay, well, we'll pick from this list and move forward then.
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's all we have for today. See ya next time.
So yeah.